الحضور الكريم، السيدات والسادة الحضور الكريم، أهلا وسهلا بكم جميعا. باسم المركز العربي للأبحاث ودراسة السياسات بتونس، أود أن أشكر البروفيسور أليسندرو أورسيني على تلبية الدعوة حتى يكون بيننا ضمن سلسلة من المحاضرات التي أطلقنا عليها هذه السنة، محاضرات الكبرى. وهذه المحاضرة يخصصها تحديدا لمسألة الراديكالية والعنف السياسي عموما. لماذا وجهنا الدعوة إلى الأستاذ أليسندرو أورسيني؟ أعتقد أنه ثمة عدة أسباب تبرر هذا الاختيار، منها ما يتعلق برسالة المركز المحمول عليه أن يكون جسراً بين مختلف الجماعات العلمية في أوروبا والمغرب العربي تحديداً، كما أن معرفتنا بالحقل العلمي الإيطالي المعاصر ظلت محدودة، فباستثناء الطبيب وعالم الإجرام لومبروزو في أواخر القرن ال19 ومن بعده باريتو في قضية ومسألة النخب، وغرامشي في مسألة الكتلة التاريخية والمثقف العضوي، وفاتيمو في فلسفة ما بعد الحداثة. تظل هذه الساحة المعرفية رغم قربنا إليها على أكثر من صعيد غير معروفة بما يكفي أساساً لدى النخب الواسعة باستثناء المختصين في اللغة والحضارة الإيطالية. أما الأسباب الذاتية المتعلقة بالأستاذ أورسيني فهي عديدة أيضاً، ولعل أهمها انشغالاته العديدة بالعنف السياسي من وجهة نظر علم الاجتماع السياسي والعلوم السياسية، وقد جعلت منه حالياً أحد أبرز المراجع العلمية، وقد ترجمت كتاباته إلى عديد اللغات، وهو يكتب باللغة الإيطالية والإنجليزية معاً. ولعل ترجمة كتابه من أجل تشريح الألوية الحمراء إلى العربية خلال السنوات الأخيرة، فضلاً عن عشرات الترجمات التي صدرت عن مختلف اللغات، دليل على هذا الاهتمام المتزايد بما يكتبه الرجل في هذه المباحث تحديداً. وفي الأخير أود أن أعبر عن شكري أيضاً للزميلة عفاف بوزية، أستاذة الحضارة الأمريكية والإنجليزية التي تدرس بالمعهد العالي للعلوم الإنسانية بتونس ابن شرف، التي ستتولى تقديم الضيف بشكل مفصل، كما ستتولى أيضاً إدارة هذه الجلسة المحاضرة. الشكر موصول إلى جميع من حضر معنا رغم طقوس رمضان الاجتماعية، وأيضاً هذا الجمهور الذي سيتابع هذه المحاضرة عبر مختلف شبكات التواصل الاجتماعي. شكراً. وفقط للإشارة إلى أن المحاضرة تدوم ما يقارب ساعة إلا ربع تقريباً. بعدها ننتقل مباشرة إلى النقاش مع هذا الحضور الكريم الذي أشكره مرة ثانية، ونختمها بعد ذلك. شكراً جزيلاً لكم. وأحيل الكلمة الآن مباشرة إلى الزميلة عفاف.
So unlike Mr. Mahdi, I'm going to speak in English. Welcome everybody. My name, as Mr. Mahdi Mabrouk introduced me, is Afif Bouzain, and I'm your event moderator for today's conference. It's really a great and real pleasure and honor to be here to introduce Mr. Alessandro Orsini, our speaker today. He is going to talk to us, discuss with us about the topic of radicalization and terrorism, as they are two of the biggest worries of the 21st century, relevant to all countries around the world, Muslim and non-Muslim, Western and Eastern. This is a subject, I think, in which we should all be and feel interested, because it is, terrorism is unfortunately the new form of war of the 21st century, unlike the traditional wars of the 20th century. It is a big major issue threatening our times, and as I said earlier, all countries alike. So our speaker today, Mr. Orsini, is a distinguished expert, distinguished and exceptional by his exceptional and brave experience of joining radical groups, mostly far-left radical groups, but also a neo-fascist group. And so when he discusses this issue of terrorism, of political violence, of radicalization, he is doing it from an internal perspective, which is something exceptional. So it is not just theory, it is really practical comments and real observations. He is an associate professor at Lewis University of Rome, which is one of the most prestigious private universities of Italy, where he teaches sociology of terrorism in the Department of Political Science. He was also a research affiliate at the Center of International Study of the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he was a visiting scholar at the Department of Political Science and the Center for International Studies. For a year also, 2016-2017, he was a member of the Committee for the Study of Jihadism, which is was actually established by the Italian government, as well as a former member, participant of the Radicalization Awareness Network, and this one was established by the European Commission, in order to bring together local, European, and regional participants and experts and activists engaged in the struggle against this phenomenon of terrorism and radicalization. For 3 years, Mr. Orsini also headed the Center for the Study of Terrorism at l'Università degli Studi di Roma, Tor Vergata, which is basically the University of Rome. He is also, as I said earlier, bravely, and this is really exceptional, known for making direct contact with violent radicals and groups, and was thus, for this reason, sought and welcomed by the most prestigious institutes and universities of the world, such as, among others, of course, Harvard University, Trinity College, European University Institute in Florence, Boston College. So all these, among others, there are others, but the list is too long to mention. And also, for all this impressive CV, he is a regular TV guest at the Italian channel that we all know in Tunisia, Rai Uno, the Italian channel, and a columnist for the Italian newspaper, widely read and popular in Italy, Il Messaggero. Mr. Orsini has a prolific bibliography, providing a valuable investigation of the beliefs and mindsets of Europe's political anarchist and far left groups, with his latest work focusing on a neo-Nazi fascist group, so right radicals. This bibliography, valuable bibliography, includes a list of remarkable articles, such as the articles I'm going to mention are not the comprehensive list of Mr. Orsini's works, but it is just a selection. Are terrorists courageous? Microsociology of extreme left terrorism. In this article, Mr. Orsini handles and to challenge the common belief that to be a terrorist, you need to have a certain degree of courage. Instead, he advances the concept of violence. That is, it is a violence that, if you like, basically is unneeded, unnecessary violence used even when the victim is under control. And he debates that it is this violence that lays at the core psychological dynamics of terrorists and not courage. In another article entitled A Day Among the Die-Hard Terrorists, the Psychological Cost of Doing Ethnographic Research, Mr. Orsini reports his direct experience of living with a group of radicals. And he focuses on the psychological repercussions he felt after living and while also living with this group of radicals, responsible for multiple murders. Still within the same exceptional experience of living with terrorists, is another article entitled Interview with a Terrorist by Vocation, A Day Among the Die-Hard Terrorists, Part 2. Here, Mr. Orsini, drawing on an interview with a militant of the Red Brigades, who was freed after a sentence, spending a sentence of 32 and 6 months in prison. Mr. Orsini explores the idea of one of his major and interesting ideas of vocational terrorism. What is vocational terrorism? It is a vocational terrorist is, according to Mr. Orsini, is one who seeks no personal interest, whether in this life or in the afterlife, okay? So he does what he does. He indulges in unlimited violence simply because he has a strong belief in the cause, in his cause, of course. Unlike professional terrorists or traditional also terrorists, who, if they are not doing it for this life, then they are doing it for the afterlife, for another life. The same idea of this vocational terrorism has been undertaken by Mr. Orsini in another article, which is entitled, and this one is in French, La radicalisation des terroristes de vocation. In this article, Mr. Orsini used the example of les frères Kouachi in France, the Kouachi brothers in France, and to explore, to argue that this type of vocational terrorism is stumped by a very intricate and much binding, strongly binding mental universe of these two terrorists, and that it is actually, this kind of terrorism is not really, according to their logic, of course, not really a form of violence, but it is a narrative, a story that they tell themselves and that they tell the others, and of which they are very convinced. In another article entitled Poverty, Ideology and Terrorism, Mr. Orsini advances another key concept, major concept of his theory in relation to political violence, and that's the STAM, which is a bond, which is an acronym, actually, in which the author introduces the concept of the bond, the social bond that brings together different people, make them terrorists, and allow them to work together and be obedient, loyal to each other and to their organizations and to their groups. The acronym stands for STAM. It's social, temporal, affective, and moral bond. It is a topic that Mr. Orsini further delineates in another subsequent article entitled Idéologie et terrorisme, le lien STAM, but I'm not going to repeat myself. It's just further delineation, a deeper, if you like, analysis. There are also, he has many other articles, such as L'attentat de Paris et le renseignement, in which he debates about the presence of Al-Qaeda in Europe itself. And so that the terrorism that Europe is facing is actually local terrorism rather than exported terrorism. There is also a much interesting forthcoming article called Radicalization Leading to Terrorism, What Everybody Should Know. Here it is basically an informative, argumentative article to understand the logic, again, of terrorists from within. And this is possible for Mr. Orsini, thanks again, I'm repeating myself, to his experience, direct experience with these radical groups. There are also some books, interesting and valuable, and I chose to focus on his two latest books, which are landmark books on the subject of radicalization and terrorism, namely Anatomy of the Red Brigades, the Religious Mindset of Modern Terrorists, and the second one is Sacrifice, My Life in a Fascist Militia. When it comes to the first book, which is entitled Anatomy of the Red Brigades, this book was a widely, publicly acclaimed book, and it won the prize of the best 2011, the best book, best foreign affairs book in the field of security studies. So it is something very serious. The Red Brigades, which is this radical group that Mr. Orsini chooses to focus on in this book, are actually a radical left terrorist group in Italy, formed in the 1970 and active all through the 1980s. This group is widely known just for a list of political assassinations, kidnappings, and bank robberies, meant to destabilize, to strike the Italian state itself. So it is not just the government, it was the Italian state with its traditionally established structure. The Red Brigades' most notorious crime was the abduction and murder of Aldo Moro in 1978, who was Italy's prime minister at that time. In the late 1990s, unfortunately and sadly, with the coming back of conservatism and radicalism in a strong trend, a new group of anti-capitalist activists revived the name of the Red Brigades and also carried out a number of political assassinations in the country. These political assassinations targeted, obviously, government officials and administrators, but also they targeted professors, academics, anyone who opposed their world vision. The major and valuable and very interesting argument, one, of course, of these arguments of this book, is that Mr. Orsini concocted a micro-sociological theory contending, debating, arguing that the dominant logic of the Red Brigades was essentially eschatological, moral, religious, if we like, okay? As these brigades, like sects members, believed in the establishment of a distorted utopian world. That is, use violence, kill, abduct, kidnap, but for a good cause. What was this good cause? Was to build this world, utopian world, almost Platonic city, okay, where everyone is happy, and everyone lives in harmony with the community, but where paradoxically no opposition was allowed. Basically, the major struggle of these Red Brigades was actually to free the world from the corruption, from the misdeeds and ill deeds of capitalism and imperialism. Orsini makes clear that this political concept of terrorism and the way they consider terrorism and terrorists and the way they consider themselves as purifiers of the world, as soldiers who are working for the good cause, is actually valid to all terroristic groups. This is, if we want to understand their logic from within, then we should consider this initial perspective of discussions. So they are all self-proclaimed purifiers of the world and share the same ultimate objective, which we said, that of building a pure society free from misery, both emotional and material misery, and a society in which no dissidence, no opposition would be accepted. In his latest, but not last, I'm sure, book entitled Sacrifice My Life in a Fascist Militia, Mr. Alessandro Orsini here shifts his attention from far-left radical groups to conservative right groups, as here again he joined a radical neo-fascist organization present in two neighboring cities, which he names Sacrifice. What is interesting is that Mr. Orsini tells us and informs his readers that despite being and belonging to the same Sacrifice organization, the two groups have not the same culture and actions also. So in this fascinating insider book, featuring dialogues with various militia members, Orsini shows fascists in their daily life, in their everyday life, and exposes their vision of the world and how they are set up in this daily life and in this parallel vision, different vision from the one we more or less share. They set up a whole world with norms, with standards, with expectations that make sense for them and for their logic. So for them, it's them who are right. We are a bit crazy of not accepting the way and the big dream of the utopian world where everybody would be happy and well at ease, both, as I told you, emotionally and materialistically or financially. So in this book, Mr. Orsini recalls the long, obviously uneasy also process of first being accepted, because it's not easy, as you can imagine, to be accepted in these two groups, these two neo-fascist groups, and later of being expelled, kicked out for his lack of ideological commitment. So it was a risky experience because we know these groups have no limits. He was accepted, of course, as an investigator activist. And as I said, as I have just said, he was expelled because of his lack of ideological commitment, engagement, and his refusal to censor his thoughts and his observations. Because as we said earlier, and as Mr. Orsini mentioned, in the utopian world of terrorists, both left and right, there is no place for opposition and dissidence. So in Sacrifice, Mr. Orsini also highlights the masculine, almost macho ethics, of masculine beliefs of the militias, of the group relations with local authorities, both the police and the politicians. Thank you very much, and I will leave the word to Mr. Alessandro Orsini.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in Tunis. I have many people to thank. So first of all, let me thank CAREP and Professor Mehdi Mabrouk for their very kind invitation. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out to hear me speak. Thank you very much also to Professor Afef Bouzayan for her very generous introduction to my academic profile, and to Safwan Trabelsi for being so kind to me, my wife, and my beloved son. In today's lecture, I will be talking about the DRIA model of radicalization I worked out to reconstruct the typical radicalization process leading to vocational terrorism. I'd like to recall your attention toward this concept, which is key to understanding my research on radicalization leading to terrorism, the concept of vocational terrorism or terrorism by vocation. What is terrorism by vocation? It is a particular kind of terrorism. And my concept of vocational terrorism draws on Max Weber's distinction between living of politics and living for politics. Those who live off politics derive the material means for their survival from politics. Those who live for politics dedicate themselves to a noble cause, sometimes to an ignoble cause, to satisfy an inner need. It's a spiritual problem. Okay. So we have politics as a profession and politics as a vocation. And we have, in my perspective, terrorism by vocation or vocational terrorism. Okay, so it's terrorism that you embrace to satisfy an inner need. So you dedicate yourself to a noble or ignoble cause, to an ideal. Okay. So this is the first premise. But there is another important premise I have to make in order to explain the DRIA model of radicalization leading to vocational terrorism. I have to premise that the DRIA model is based on a previous distinction between cognitive radicalization and violent radicalization. Cognitive radicalization has to do with radicalization of opinion or attitude. Violent radicalization has to do with behavior, with violent behavior. So if I say, to employ the specialized hate language of the groups I studied, if I say I intensely dislike, I despise Italian people, or Christian people, or Muslim, and I think they deserve to be exterminated, that's an example of cognitive radicalization. Thankfully, those who have radical beliefs, in the vast majority of the cases, don't want to employ violence. They don't want to join any terrorist organization, likely. Okay. So I am going to investigate the relationship between cognitive radicalization and violent radicalization, which is a big topic. So now I think it's time to delve into the DRIA model. The DRIA model, it's an acronym. Each letter has a particular meaning. D stands for disintegration of social identity. R stands for reconstruction of a social identity through a radical ideology. I stands for integration in a revolutionary sect. There is a reason why I am employing, or I have developed, this specialized vocabulary. I'm not talking about terrorist organization, because I was looking for a broader concept, the concept of revolutionary sect. Okay. And then we have A, that stands for alienation from the surrounding world. Okay. So let me say that the DRIA model acknowledges that it is impossible to trace so many biographies back to just one sociological model. It means that the DRIA model doesn't have the intellectual arrogance to think that just one sociological model suffices to explain all of the trajectories, all of the individual trajectories leading to terrorism. And that's the reason why the DRIA model only deals with a particular kind of terrorism, which is vocational terrorism. Okay. But before delving into each phase of the radicalization model, let me tell you something more about my interest in studying cognitive radicalization. So I was not, and I am not satisfied with the most widespread definition of radicalization or cognitive radicalization. We have hundreds of definitions of terrorism as well as radicalization. But one of the well-known, one of the most widespread definitions of radicalization reads as follows. Radicalization is the process of acquiring extreme beliefs justifying the use of violence. So I was not satisfied, and I'm not satisfied at all with this definition. I want to investigate, I want to say a little bit more about cognitive radicalization. In my own definition, cognitive radicalization is the process of acquiring a radical mental universe. Okay. I worked out this term because I'm looking for something that extreme left terrorists, extreme right terrorists, Islamic terrorists have in common. So what is a radical mental universe? To me, it's a particular kind of mindset which is based on 7 cognitive features. The first cognitive feature of any radical mental universe is radical catastrophism. What is radical catastrophism? It's the belief that the world has been plunged into an abyss of misery and pain. An abyss of misery and pain. People are suffering everywhere. This is radical catastrophism, and you can find evidence of it in extreme left terrorist organization, right-wing terrorist organization, and Islamic terrorist organization. It's radical catastrophism. The second cognitive feature is identification of evil. The world has been plunged into an abyss of misery and pain. The world is a horrible place to live in. There is a social category that is responsible for this tragic situation. So that's the second cognitive feature, the identification of evil. The third cognitive characteristic is obsession with purification. So the world has been plunged into an abyss of misery and pain. There is a social category that is responsible for this tragic situation, and that social category must be exterminated. The fourth cognitive characteristic is obsession with purity. So now we will see the difference between obsession with purification and obsession with purity. Obsession with purity means that since the world is completely morally corrupted, I don't want to have any kind of contact with such an horrible place, which is the surrounding world. Sometimes is the bourgeoisie society. Sometimes is a Muslim country or Muslim people, and so on. So there is always a social category to be exterminated. That social category dominates the world. I don't want to have any kind of contact with those horrible people. And I don't want to stay in contact. I don't want to have direct contact with this horrible world, which is a horrible place to live in. So the fifth characteristic is waiting for the end. Since the world has been plunged into an abyss of misery and pain, everything is morally corrupted, the world is going to end. say, logic consequence of the corruption. There must be an end, and the end is approaching. So it's waiting for the end. The sixth characteristic is exaltation of martyrdom, or desire to be persecuted. This is typical of vocational terrorism. I want to be persecuted. I want to be arrested or killed by the police, because the police represent the bulwark, represent the army of this horrible world. So if police want to kill me, that's the proof that I am pure and you are impure. And then the seventh cognitive characteristic is the justification of the means through the end. There is always a justification for extreme right terrorist organization, extreme left terrorist organization, Islamic terrorist organization to carry out violence. Okay? So, to sum up, in my perspective, cognitive radicalization is not just the process of embracing, of acquiring radical ideas, justifying the use of violence. Cognitive radicalization is the process through which people acquire a radical mental universe. Okay, the DRIA model tries to understand, tries to reconstruct the typical radicalization process leading to vocational terrorism, which means the typical radicalization process leading to acquiring a radical mental universe. So D stands for disintegration of social identity. In my research, in my perspective, everything starts with an identity crisis. And the triggers for an identity crisis to occur can be many. Sometimes they are wars. We know that there is a strong relationship between wars and radicalization process. Sometimes it's a personal crisis due to the fact that you are fired. Sometimes because you have a crisis within your family. So there are many ways that can trigger an identity crisis. Okay, so that's the first step. For reasons of time, I don't want to delve into this subject, but I think that everybody can easily identify all of the ways an individual can experience an identity crisis. So now there is the second stage. I have an identity crisis, and I am looking for points of reference in my life. Because typically, identity crises push people to question the values and beliefs of their previous life. So I have an identity crisis. I'm not happy at all. I'm suffering. So maybe my values and my beliefs were wrong. I was respectful of the laws of my country, and now I realize I made a huge mistake. Something is wrong in my culture, in my ideals, in my values. So, in the vast majority of the cases, identity crises open the doors to what terrorism scholars call cognitive opening. What is cognitive opening? Cognitive opening doesn't mean that you are going to become a terrorist. Absolutely not. Okay, so I know so many young people as a volunteer, but also as a scholar who experience an identity crisis, and they are very peaceful. They are absolutely against violence. So please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people who experience an identity crisis are dangerous. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But a tiny minority, so few people, try to overcome this identity crisis by embracing a radical ideology, a radical worldview. And why? Because ideology, particularly extremist ideologies, dictate people what to do, what to wear, what to say. Okay, so radical ideologies have the power to dictate what to do. If you are experiencing a severe identity crisis, you need points of reference. So the second stage of the DRIA model says that you have an identity crisis, you look for a radical ideology, okay? Looking for points of reference. But there are so many different ways to overcome an identity crisis. Likely, embracing a violent, a radical ideology is just one of the many paths we can follow. Okay, so the first two stages of the DRI model deal very much with cognitive radicalization. So far, we have talked about what happens in people's mind when they experience an identity crisis. Okay, so we are talking about values, beliefs, ideologies. We are talking about cognitive opening. What is cognitive opening? It's the fact that I am open to embrace a new worldview. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this new view word must be a violent or an aggressive one. Okay. So now we are moving to violent radicalization. So the last two stages of the DRIA model deal very much with violent radicalization. And again, the distinction I made in the beginning between cognitive radicalization and violent radicalization. Because I stands for integration in a revolutionary sect. By integrating yourself into a revolutionary sect, it can be an ISIS or an Al-Qaeda cell, it could be the Red Brigades or sacrifice. So you are moving from cognitive radicalization to violent radicalization. And integration in a revolutionary sect is very important because now you are linked, now you are in contact, in direct contact with like-minded people. Okay. And they have the power to reinforce your ideology and the idea that there is a moral justification, a moral duty to carry out violence, to employ violence. And then we have the fourth stage, which is alienation from the surrounding world. The revolutionary sect, of course, there are exceptions, but what is typical of revolutionary sects, particularly underground revolutionary sect, is that they don't want their members to stay in contact with the outside world. So there is a manifest and a latent reason for that. The manifest is that you don't want your like-minded friends to get arrested. It's understandable. So you have to try to protect the revolutionary sect, and so you need to live underground. But there is also a latent function of the alienation from the surrounding war stage, which is you need to distance yourself from the surrounding world, because the revolutionary sect don't want other people to question your violent beliefs. Okay? So if you go home and say to your mother, I want to kill my boyfriend, or I want to kill my girlfriend because she did something wrong to me, your mother will say to you, don't do that, I am going to call the police. So this is an example of negative feedback. Okay? So negative feedback occurs when we are in contact with the surrounding world. Okay? With the surrounding world. So people can always say to us, don't do that. Okay? This is a horrible behavior. Okay? And people surrounding us can also say, your beliefs and your violent ideas are simply horrible. So that's an example of negative feedback. But if you have no links with the surrounding world, and you live your everyday life within a revolutionary sect, with like-minded people, with people who embraced a radical mental universe, that's a big problem. Because all the times I have interviewed multiple murders, terrorists, they said to me, Professor Orsini, accepting the idea of killing is very difficult, because we come from, in many cases, bourgeois families. We had no violent ideas in our previous life. So typically, it takes time to accept the idea of killing. And this topic opens the door to another topic I have investigated very much, particularly in my book, Anatomy of the Red Brigades, which is the dehumanization process occurring in the revolutionary sect. For anyone coming from a bourgeois society, from a non-violent upbringing, it's very difficult to accept the idea of killing someone. And it is very, very important. I would say it is decisive to dehumanize your enemies, to accept the idea of killing. Of course, I have to stress again the importance of vocational terrorism, not talking about professional terrorism. I pay you, you kill, okay, no problem. I'm talking about terrorism by vocation, again, because the DRIA model doesn't have the intellectual arrogance to explain every kind of violent behavior, but it focuses on vocational terrorism, people who have the need, people who need to satisfy an inner need, a spiritual need. Okay, I kill because I have to satisfy a spiritual need. Okay, so that's alienation from the surrounding world. So there is no time left for me to go forward because I want to give the floor to the audience. But let me add something important. In one of my articles titled, Are Terrorists Courageous? Micro-Sociology of Left-Wing Terrorism, by employing Randall Collins' theory, micro-sociological theory of violence, I investigated the way in which the flow of adrenaline. I have investigated the relationship between adrenaline and terrorist attacks. Okay, what does it mean? It means that when it comes to killing someone, it's not easy. So I have interviewed many killers. And what they say is that it's not easy at all because, first of all, you have to overcome the adrenaline. Okay. When it comes to punching someone in the face, we have a problem. All human beings have a problem. Okay. To overcome what Randall Collins calls the barrier of confrontational tension and fear. So let me say a few words about this very important micro-sociological theory of violence. What is the barrier of confrontational tension and fear? So the civilization process, or the process of becoming civilized, has created in human beings a particular psychological barrier we need to overcome to kill someone or to punch someone else in the face. So the barrier of confrontational tension and fear is the tension and fear, talks about the tension and fear we experience, we feel when we are about to kill someone. Okay, so if we are not good at overcoming the barrier of confrontational tension and fear, typically our violence simply aborts. It doesn't come off. Okay. So terrorists worked out strategies to kill people by overcoming their barrier of confrontational tension and fear. And in my interviews with terrorists, I found out that terrorists are not courageous because they typically employ two strategies to overcome the barrier of confrontational tension and fear. The first strategy is attacking the weak. If you attack an isolated person who has no possibility to fight back, carrying out violence is easier because you don't have to fear the victim's reaction. Okay. So in studying, so I studied and investigated so many terrorist attacks in simplest details, okay? And I have found out many cases in which terrorists failed to kill their victims simply because they were not good at overcoming the barrier of confrontational tension and fear. And the second strategy they typically use is the strategic use of deceit. If you are unarmed, if you are isolated, if you have no possibility to escape, and you don't realize I am about to kill you, that's a very good way to overcome the barrier of confrontational tension and fear. So I tried to combine sociological theory with empirical research to explain that the last stage of the DRIA model, which is alienation from the surrounding world, is very important because killing is not easy. Contrary to what many people believe, killing is not easy at all. So we need, in many cases, a revolutionary sect providing us with psychological help and also logistical help. Not only logistical help. We need guns, we need weapons, we need like-minded people helping us to carry out an horrible massacre like the Bataclan massacre, just to mention one of the cases I have analyzed. But you also need psychological support. And the Revolutionaries Act is this powerful social force helping terrorists to overcome many problems, including the overcoming of the barrier of confrontational tension and fear, also by dehumanizing enemies. Okay, I have so many things to talk about because I've published several books on terrorism and political violence, but let me say that I was very influenced by Max Weber's theory. Because I am a field researcher, I am an ethnographer who wants to get into the mindset, who wants to get into radical mindset, into someone else's radical mindset. So let me clarify, I'd like to make it plain clear that explaining, and Max Weber is very clear about that, let me make it plain clear that explaining is not justifying. So I want to understand terrorism, I want to see the world through the eyes of terrorists, because I want to fight terrorism. So explaining doesn't mean justifying, okay, what terrorists do. So I think that everybody has this very important task to accomplish, that is, to fight radicalization leading to terrorism. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention and for your invitation, for giving me the opportunity to visit your wonderful country, Tunisia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Orsini, for this valuable presentation and for delivering this constructive argumentation of justification, understanding and not justifying this issue of our century. I'm sure attendants, myself included, found your arguments, your experiences, your ideas much interesting and illuminating. We appreciate the personal presence, the academic contribution, the challenges and worries you shared with us. I'm going to make it short and leave more time to your questions and to debating them with Mr. Orsini. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Professor Orsini, for this insightful presentation. And I would like to revert to a model that you developed in your book of 2011. And you mentioned some key ideas of this book in your presentation right now. And you formulated a model, a logical model, in order to explain especially the behavior of these left groups, which is based mainly, basically, on the relationship between an eschatological worldview based on you mentioned 7 features, and in your first book you mentioned just maybe 5 features: binary thinking, mania for purity, dehumanization of one's enemies, radical catastrophism, and then scientific conception of the revolution. And one of the reservations which were formulated when it comes to this model is that it is a dehistoricized model in order to explain such behavior of these revolutionary behavior. What do you think about such a reservation? Thank you.
Sorry, what do I think about?
This reservation formulated when it comes...
This criticism.
Yeah.
Okay, so the problem is that if we study Max Weber's sociological theory, and one of the greatest Max Weber's achievements was that he overcome the distinction between the explanation line of analysis and the interpretive line of analysis, or if you prefer, the interpretive line of analysis and the explanation line of analysis. And according to Max Weber, in order to investigate historical phenomenon, we need concepts, we need theoretical concepts. So I think that those criticisms of my book, Anatomy of the Red Brigades, saying that Orsini, could you please help me remind the criticism?
One kind of the historicized...
So Alessandro Orsini dehistoricized the story of the terrorism. I think that those critics of mine, of course I thank them for their very kind attention. I'm honored for scholars to pay attention to Anatomy of the Red Brigades, simply didn't study Max Weber. And according to Max Weber, it is not possible to go forward with historical studies without developing concepts. So that's the first problem, because Anatomy of the Red Brigades has a deceitful title, in the sense that it is not a book on the Red Brigades. It is not only a book on the Red Brigades. It is divided into two parts. In the first part, I work out an ideal type, as Max Weber teaches us. And in the second part, I have investigated what happens when a particular kind of mindset, which is a radical mental universe, conquers the state. So in the second part of Anatomy of the Red Brigades, I studied Mao's China, Stalin's Russia, and Pol Pot's Cambodia, and so on. And I think that some of my critics didn't understand the methodology behind Anatomy of the Red Brigades. That is explained in the preface to the book. And I listed the questions I want to answer. And one of the questions I want to answer in Anatomy of the Red Brigades is what happens when a revolutionary mindset, when a binary code mentality comes to power. And it is my methodology. I understand that it is not easy to grasp it, but the methodological problem with Anatomy of the Red Brigades is that we cannot answer the question by studying the story of the Red Brigades, simply because historically the Red Brigades didn't come to power. So it was a very difficult intellectual enterprise for me to answer the question. So the methodology I used is, first of all, I portray the main cognitive features of a radical mental universe, and then, since the Red Brigades didn't conquer the state, I will try to answer the question, what would have happened if the Red Brigades had conquered the Italian state, by answering to another question, what happens when that particular kind of mentality, that particular kind of mindset comes to power? What happened when a binary code mentality came to power in Russia, in Cambodia, in China, and so on? So I think that's the problem with Anatomy of the Red Brigades. Many of my critics simply didn't study, I think, Max Weber's theory and didn't understand what is the main purpose of the book. So, and thank you very much for the question, very challenging and very interesting. And thank you very much for reminding this concept I forgot to mention in my lecture, which is the concept I worked out of binary code mentality. Sorry, I forgot to tell you that the DRIA model shapes this particular kind of mindset I name a binary code mentality through the dehumanization process, through dehumanizing the enemies. So I am the pure, you are the impure. Okay, and that's what I call the binary code mentality. So thank you very much for recalling my attention toward this concept. Thank you.
So, thank you, Mr. Orsini, for this persuasive answer, and thank you, Maria, for this interesting question. Yes, we will
Thank you so much, Professor Orsini, for this insightful lecture on terrorism and the root causes of radicalization. And it's a great pleasure for me first to listen to someone from the West talking about extremism, radicalization, and terrorism, a phenomenon that has long been associated in many narratives with the East and with the Middle East. So thank you for this opening, as you have already said. I have a few questions, if you permit, and if you like, you can answer one by one, or you can answer them all later.
Okay.
First.
Could you please assign the question so that I can remember all of them?
I think I think it would be preferable to just ask your questions one by one, so
Good.
it's easier for me.
Yes, because I want to be very kind
Yes.
to you, so I want to answer all of the questions. I don't want to forget your question.
Thank you. You focused on the mindset and the cognitive approach to this phenomenon. And there is really a semantic muddle about the definition of this phenomenon of extremism, radicalization, and its connection with violence.
Yes.
My question is, to what extent can we say that radicalization in the West, an affluent society, has roots in the mid-16th century Reformation movement? Remember that the new, let me say, radicals or extremists, as you have illustrated through the Red Brigade, have almost the same ideas. They claim they would be purifiers, although the mid-16th century reformists talk about the purification of the church and Christianity. These are tending to purify society. That's my first question.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can you please summarize the first question?
If I get it right, it's just you are asking about the major changes from the 60s on.
Oh, yes.
If I have to put it in simpler terms, flatly talking, to what extent can we say that radicalization in the West nowadays has deep roots in the mid-16th century Reformation movement in Europe?
It's a great question. Yes, because maybe you read Anatomy of the Red Brigades. So first of all, let me thank you for this very interesting question, because Anatomy of the Red Brigades, the second part of Anatomy of the Red Brigades starts from the 16th century, because one of my theses is that the history of the Red Brigades, I mean, as a mentality, as a mindset, can be traced back to the 16th century in the Reformation. But let me say, first of all, let me say something that is very important to me, okay? Because I have investigated all kinds of terrorism, extreme left terrorism, right-wing terrorism, Islamic terrorism, because one of my aims is to challenge this common sense explanation according to which terrorism only deals with Islam. And Max Weber says that when we conduct an ethnographic research, an historical research, any kind of research, we should be free value. Okay, so free value. But Max Weber says that values are very important when it comes to decide what subject to investigate. He says that you don't have to be free value when it comes to decide the subject of your thesis or the subject of the book you want to write. Okay, you want to write. You don't have to be free value. So one of my values is that I deeply believe in interreligious dialogue. I'm very fascinated by Islam countries, Islamic culture. And one of the reasons why I investigated extreme left terrorism, right-wing terrorism, is because I want to explain to my students that the problem is not Islam, or at least it's not only Islam. And that's one of the reasons why I worked out that model to study cognitive radicalization, because, as Max Weber teaches us, if we develop a theoretical concept, comparison is possible. I can compare Islamic terrorists with left-wing terrorists and extreme right terrorists if I investigate terrorism also in terms of a particular kind of mindset. We can see the similarities. And I understand that many people in Europe don't like this kind of approach, because European people always want to see the evil in someone else's eye, and particularly in the Islam country. Not every people, but many people in Europe hate, intensely dislike Islam, unfortunately. So, as a scholar, I am free value, but as a man, I'm very committed to helping. I am very committed to promoting peace culture, tolerance, and respect. Okay. Now, the answer to your question, I think there is no time left because you raised a very, very important question. So I should delve into the history of Europe to answer your question. But in a nutshell, the answer is yes. In Anatomy of the Red Brigades, I explain that particular kind of mindset, the mindset of the purifiers of the world, I always work out new concepts. And one of the concepts I worked out in Anatomy of the Red Brigades is the purifiers of the world, because a Red Brigades killer said, we were purifiers of the world because we wanted to purify the world by exterminating millions of people. He said that once the Red Brigades, they didn't come to power, but he said that to come to power is not sufficient. It doesn't suffice to purify the world. He said, verbatim, we have to exterminate thousands, if not millions, of people. Okay. Because there is an entire social category deserving to be exterminated. So if we study terrorism, so I am a field researcher. Okay, I am someone who did a lot of empirical research, who make direct contact with terrorists, with killers. But my empirical research is very rooted in sociological theory. And if we study theoretically terrorism, and if we talk about radical mental universe, we can see that Al-Qaeda members, ISIS members, at least in my perspective, Red Brigades members, and many extreme right terrorists simply share the same mentality. They say the same things, and they want to achieve the same goal. They want to exterminate entire social category. So now I need to understand why I should fear Islam if I have so many terrorists in Europe coming from European culture, coming from political culture rooted in Europe? So it's one of the questions I'd like to raise.
Thank you very much. I hope he answered your question.
Can I go
and
to the
we
second
can proceed, yes, to the second
Please. Thank you. Drawing on what you provided in your cognitive approach to this phenomenon, I can detect certain overlap between your method in dealing with radicalization and the French Olivier Roy's approach, because both of you rely on Max Weber, right? To what extent, or how do you see yourself different from Roy's approach to radicalization, especially in France?
Wow, that's another very interesting question. But to answer the question, we need a premise. Okay, I need to premise in a nutshell that in the international debate over terrorism, there is a split, or particularly in France, there are scholars who say that the problem is Islamization of radicalism, and scholars who say the problem is radicalization of Islam. According to Olivier Roy, the problem is Islamization of radicalism. There are radicals, petty criminals, who embrace Islam as an a posteriori. So in English, we say a posteriori. In Italian, we say a posteriori. Okay, it's an a posteriori justification for violence. It's just a cover. You are violent. You employ violence, and then you try to justify your violence by resorting to Islamic culture or Marxism or whatever. So on the other side, there are scholars who say that no, the problem is Islam in itself, because there is something wrong in the Islamic culture, justifying violence or pushing individuals toward violence. So I think that, so I tried to solve, or at least I tried to face the problem empirically. So I studied many biographies of people who succeeded in carrying out terrorist attacks in the West between 2004 and 2018. I've published an article, it was forthcoming a few months ago, but now it was published in Studies in Conflict and Terrorism, which is the leading journal in the field. And the title of the article is What Everybody Should Know About Radicalization and the DRIA Model, and the DRIA Model. So if you want, you will find evidence. You will find the cases, the biographies, the 39 biographies I have investigated to work out the DRIA model. So unfortunately, there is no time left to list all of the names. But anyway, I tried to face the problem empirically. And what I found out is that it is not possible to give a definite answer to the question, who is wrong or who is right between Olivier Roy and Gilles Kepel, because, and again, this is Max Weber's speaking. Max Weber says that empirical reality, outer reality, is pure chaos. What does it mean in my perspective? It means that we have thousands, if not millions of people who get radicalized all around the world. So I could provide you with evidence that Olivier Roy is right, and I could also provide you with evidence that Olivier Roy is wrong, because the empirical reality is pure chaos. We have so many biographies demonstrating that Olivier Roy is right and Olivier Roy is wrong, and same is valid with reference to Gilles Kepel. So if I can mention a wonderful book I read on terrorism, it was published by, if I rightly remember, by the University of Pennsylvania Press, by Mitchell Silber, and the book is titled The Al-Qaeda Factor. And so he tried to solve the problem empirically, another problem, but I loved the approach, Mitchell Silber's approach. There was another debate over terrorism, and Mitchell Silber said, okay, it's time to conduct an empirical research to provide evidence in order to understand who is wrong or who is right. And the question Mitchell Silber wants to answer is about how radicalization happens. Is it a bottom-up process or is it a top-down process? This is another very important debate. And he said that empirically based, what the evidence says is that in some cases it's a top-down process, in other cases it's a bottom-up process. So I investigated so many biographies of people who succeeded in carrying out terrorist attacks in the West between 2004 and 2018 in the name of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. And what I found out is that in some cases, Oliver Roy is right. In other cases, maybe Gilles Kepel is right. But with only reference, with my research that dealt with people who carried out terrorist attacks in the West between 2004 and 2018, I found out that in the vast majority of the cases, Oliver Roy is right. It doesn't mean that he is always right. Okay. It means that empirical evidence suggests that in many cases, in the vast majority of the cases, Oliver Roy is right. And again, Max Weber says that we cannot reach any conclusion in sociology or in social science before conducting a research. Because Max Weber didn't like very much Marxism. Max Weber said Marxism has the tendency to come to conclusion before conducting research. It is always the economic factor, the most important factor in social change. And Max Weber said, wait, you conduct an historical sociological research and then you can conclude that the economic factor was the most important factor of social change. And I would say the same with reference to radicalization. I think that if we studied radicalization in Nigeria, Somalia, Iraq, Lebanon, maybe we will find evidence and different evidence, and we could reach different conclusions. So the DRIA model, I'll say it again because it's important, has not the intellectual arrogance to say, I can explain all the trajectories leading to terrorism. I just want to focus on a particular kind of terrorism, which is terrorism by vocation. Of course, you could challenge my interpretation by saying that I don't think, I believe that there is no existential terrorism or vocational terrorism, but that's social science, okay? But to me, and let me end my answer to our very kind colleague and friend by providing you with information to challenge the DRIA model, okay? And I think that one of the most beautiful books I have ever read in my intellectual career with regard to terrorism is Clark Macaulay and Sofia Moskalenko's Friction, How Radicalization Happens Between Them and Us. It was published by Oxford University Press. It also had a second edition. And in that wonderful book, the book is wonderful to me, even if the book doesn't pay attention to ideology, or no, I should be more careful. Clark Macaulay simply says that ideology doesn't matter very much in the story. According to, I had the great pleasure to meet with Clark Macaulay at MIT a few years ago, so we are in contact. I just had an exchange of emails with Clark Macaulay yesterday. And Clark Macaulay says, Alessandro, there is no empirical evidence that ideology leads to terrorism. So it's a big topic. And Clark Macaulay and Sofia Moskalenko identified 12 mechanisms of radicalization, 6 mechanisms of individual radicalization, 3 mechanisms of group radicalization, and 3 mechanisms of mass radicalization, and they never mention ideology, only to say that there is no empirical evidence about the link between radicalization in opinion and radicalization in behavior. Okay, but anyway, I think this is a never-ending discussion, a never-ending debate about the role of ideology in radicalization leading to terrorism. To me, I'm also an ethnographer who joined and who was also a militant in neo-fascist groups. Ideology matters very much only in some cases. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm going to kindly ask you to make the answers a little bit shorter, okay, so that we leave more time to more questions.
Okay.
Okay. So, would you please, since we are running short on time, we're just going to move to other questions, and if we have time, we will go back to you, I promise. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Munir.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I think that we can
open the microphone.
Yeah?
Could you please open the microphone, please?
No, it's
oh, it's open. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
No, that's my voice.
No, I understand you because I have the same problem. So,
just to give another point of view about what you mentioned in your presentation, that people who are analyzed by your in your articles and in your books are to some extent taken as individuals, and there is this kind of analysis which is in the relationship between the self and its identity. That's why you are talking about disintegration and then integration, and then this people who are looking for a group which could integrate them or reintegrate them. And then this is the relationship between the individual and its behavior, its life, its identity, and so on. And then we could have wondering about the relationship between these individuals and their culture. If the radicalization of young people, young Muslim people in Europe is the same thing as the radicalization of Red Brigade or neo-Nazi radicalization, then where is culture? Where is this model of values which is shaping the behavior of people? This is my first question, and I think that for this purpose, the special purpose of culture, we have to go back to the 60s, but to see that we are in a post-colonial period, in a post-colonial mind of set, and then there is a reinterpretation of Islam in Europe itself by the third, as it is called, the third generation of migrants, of especially Maghrebian migrants in France. So my question is about this background, of this cultural background and this historical background in relationship with post-colonial period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munir. Mr. Alessandro Orsini, as I told you, just try to make your answers as brief as possible, okay, because you have so many people wanting to interact.
I understand. So could you please sum up? The question is about the power of culture if I correctly understand,
Okay,
in radicalization.
if I got it right, Mr. Munir Saidani is asking about the similarities and divergences across the radicals of the East and the West, and the position of cultural role of the cultural background, especially relevant to immigrants, children of immigrants, first immigrants, mainly in France, because this is, I think, mostly what interests us, Tunisian
Yes, it's the second and the third generation problem. And my answer is that France is a particular case. We should focus on France as a particular case, even if there are other countries with similarities, for example, Belgium and other countries. But I would say that that kind of terrorism, to me, is the typical vocational terrorism. Terrorism leading to the Bataclan massacre and Charlie Hebdo shooting, both in 2015, they are typical case of vocational terrorism, of people who embraced during their youth Western ideals, they failed, and they were very dissatisfied, and particularly they were looking for new points of reference. They find out in a very radical ideology. So if I think of the French case, I think of vocational terrorism. They do that because they need to satisfy an inner cause.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have two questions. The first from Mr. Mohamed Rahmouni, my colleague.
Thank you very much. I noticed that you have used in your intervention Marxist terms such as alienation, bourgeois category, revolution. Do you think that these radical groups in the 17th were widely influenced by Marxist ideology? Knowing that these groups in the 17th, such as Baader-Meinhof group in Germany, Red Army in Japan, yes, the Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine, which is based on Marxist ideology, were influenced by this Marxist ideology, and there was a link or collaboration between criminal groups or criminal persons and these radical groups. And we all remember Carlos. We remember also in French when Jacques Mérine were killed by the police, the Communist Party protested against this, what he calls a crime against this criminal. If yes, how do you explain this link between Marxism, radicalism, resistance, and crime?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. Yes, Mr. Orsini?
In the 60s.
No, in the 70s.
In the 70s, okay, in the 70s. I think that you are touching upon a very important topic about the relationship between extreme left and also particularly, I would say, in Italy, extreme right terrorism and crime. Okay, but I think that the main part of the story is that this is a typical bourgeois phenomenon. So in an article of mine titled Poverty, Ideology and Terrorism, I spent several months, if not years, at the Ministry of Justice in Italy to collect all of the data about sex, age, professions of all Italian terrorists, extreme left and right-wing terrorists. And I found out, I have published the statistics in the article I just mentioned. I found out that in the vast majority of the cases, they came from bourgeois families. So they had no relationship with criminality and so on. And it was a typical bourgeois phenomenon also in Germany, and I would say also the Red Army faction in Japan. I think there is enough evidence suggesting that in the vast majority of the cases, they came from well-being groups. But in some cases, that terrorist organizations had links with criminality. But I don't think that's the story. Okay? The story is that ideology played a very important role in the radicalization process of all that people coming from the bourgeois strata of Italian society, German society, Japanese society, and so on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Alessandro Orsini. I have one more question. Yes, Monsieur.
شكرا على ما قدمتموه من عرض.
Okay, sorry.
شكرا على ما قدمتموه من عرض. أنا لدي سؤال يتعلق بجزئية من عرضكم أستاذنا، تتعلق بكيفية اشتغال العقل الإدراكي المعرفي في نقطة محددة. هذه النقطة تتعلق بنزع الأنسنة عن المستهدفين بالقتل. يفترض أن المستهدف بالقتل هو مصنف ضمن الأطراف المسؤولة عن فساد العالم، لذلك فقتله ومحقه يهدف إلى تنقية العالم وتطهير العالم من الفساد. لأن هذه استراتيجية نزع الأنسنة هي في الإيديولوجيا الماركسية المتطرفة استهداف أعداء الطبقة العاملة، وفي الإيديولوجيا الإسلامية استهداف أعداء الإسلام. هذا مفهوم يمكن أن يفهم في إطار هذا العقل الإدراكي، لكن طالما أن يعني أغلب ضحايا هذا التطرف هذا الإرهاب هم من المدنيين البسطاء، كيف نفسر استراتيجية نزع الأنسنة؟ كيف تتمكن هذه الإيديولوجيات المتطرفة الإرهابية من أن تنزع الأنسنة عن الفئات التي يفترض أن القتل هو لإنقاذهم من فساد العالم؟ يعني هذه المفارقة كيف تفسرها؟ شكرا.
Thank you very much.
Very challenging question. So first of all, to me, cognitive radicalization doesn't suffice. It doesn't suffice in itself to push anyone toward carry out violence. Okay, we need a combination of the two. We need both cognitive radicalization and violent radicalization. We need a radical ideology if we are talking about vocational terrorism, but we also need social group dynamics. So that's the reason why the DRIA model is divided into two parts. The first deals with cognitive radicalization that doesn't suffice in itself. And the second part deals with violent radicalization, okay, which means with social group dynamics. The question you raised, I think it's very difficult to answer the question because I think I understand your point, because you are trying to say, I want to purify the world. I carry out a terrible massacre in Tunis, and maybe I kill like-minded people. It could happen, okay? But in their perspective, they don't want to purify the world for us, but just for themselves, in the sense that, according to them, it is simply impossible to purify the world without exterminating people. So this is necessary. So this is a price they want to pay. Okay? They are running the risk to kill like-minded people, but they try to target environments. They try to target places that are supposed not to be. They try to target places they consider against their religion, their values, their political culture. So in their perspective, they think that it is impossible for a pure to go to the Bataclan. So this is just an assumption, but that's the way in which a radical mindset works.
So yes, thank you very much, Mr. Orsini. Yes, Monsieur.
السلام عليكم. شكرا جزيلا على هذه المحاضرة وعلى هذه المداخلة. الأستاذ تفضل وقسم التطرف إلى قسمين. القسم الأول هو التطرف الإدراكي المعرفي، والذي ليس هو بالضرورة عنيف، والذي ينبثق عنه فيما بعد التطرف العنيف. إذن كيف يمكننا أن نمزج بين المعرفة؟ على ما فهمت أن المعرفة في غالب الأحيان تقود إلى التطرف، باعتبار أن الحركات المنظمات الإرهابية كلها منبثقة عن إيديولوجيات، سواء كانت إيديولوجيا مثلا كالإيديولوجيا اليسارية نموذج الألوية الحمراء أو الدين. يوجد متطرفون أو إرهابيون بالنسبة للدين، جميع الأديان، الديانة المسيحية، اليهودية، الإسلامية إلى غير ذلك. هل وفي أي تطرف إدراكي معرفي مهما كان نقيا أو مهما كان مسالما، دائما هناك يحمل في ثناياه إشارة إلى العنف، إلى كيف يمكن أن نحمي هذه الإيديولوجيا أو هذا التدين أو هذا المجتمع الجديد. هل هناك فترة زمنية معينة يحتاج هذا الإدراك المعرفي إلى أن يختمر لكي يتولد وتنبثق عنه حركات متطرفة عنيفة تفضي إلى العنف كما هو الحال الآن، لا بالنسبة للأديان الثلاث، الإسلام أو المسيحية أو اليهودية، وكذلك الإيديولوجيات الماركسية أو إلى غير ذلك.
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. Just wait for the translation to be finished.
Okay, if I correctly understand, the question is, how does it happen? What is the trigger from cognitive radicalization to violent radicalization? Okay, so it's another big topic. So there are many researches on this argument. So my answer is that ideology pushes you toward revolutionary sect, in the sense that you embrace a radical ideology and you look for you look for like-minded people. In other cases, it is the revolutionary sect that looks for like-minded people. So again, there is not just one process explaining the move from cognitive radicalization to violent radicalization. We know that, but let me say something about scholars who challenge the DRIA model. Some of my colleagues, but they don't deal with vocational terrorism. Some of my colleagues says, according to Alessandro Orsini's interpretation, ideology is decisive in pushing individuals toward revolutionary sect or revolutionary sects or terrorist organizations. But these scholars say empirical evidence suggests that some people join terrorist organizations without being cognitively radicalized. It means that I become a terrorist not out of an ideology. I decide to join a terrorist organization because my father is a terrorist, or my mother, my brother, or some of my friends. So empirical evidence, and I agree with that, demonstrates that in some cases, or in many cases, people become terrorists. They join terrorist organization, not because of an ideology, but because they have loved ones. Okay. So, and that's the reason why I only focus on vocational terrorism, because empirical evidence also suggests that many people look for revolutionary sects because they have previously embraced a radical ideology. Again, the outer reality, as Max Weber says, is pure chaos. We have millions of people who got radicalized. I think that there is enough empirical evidence to prove that the DRIA model works, and a lot of empirical evidence disproving the DRIA model, because there are many ways to become a terrorist. I'd like to conclude by mentioning another wonderful book. If I was asked, Professor Orsini, what are the most beautiful books you have ever read on radicalization leading to terrorism, I would say two. The first is Clark Macaulay and Sofia Moskalenko's book, Friction, and the second was published in 2019 by Oxford University Press by Arje Kruglanski, Gunaratna, and Belanger, 3 authors. And the title of the book is titled The 3 Pillars of Radicalization. And I was so enthusiastic seeing that such outstanding scholars agree with me about the huge importance of ideology in radicalization. I cannot summarize the theory. The theory they develop in the book is named the motivational imbalance theory, but they conclude that ideology is the necessary, albeit inadequate, condition for anyone to become a terrorist, which is exactly the same conclusion of the DRIA model. Let me clarify that the DRIA model is a never-ending project, because I began working on the DRIA model in, if I correctly remember, in 2006 or 2007. And Anatomy of the Red Brigades was originally published in 2009 in Italy, and then it was translated in 2011 by Cornell University Press. So in 2009 is the year in which I published for the first time the DRIA model, which means that I have been working on the DRIA model, I have been working on the DRIA model since 2007. It means that I have been working on the DRIA model for roughly 15 years. It's a never-ending project because, unfortunately, radicalization and terrorism, it seems to be a never-ending tragic phenomenon. So I have always to deal with empirical evidence and new empirical evidence. Okay, but I would say these are the 2 most beautiful books I have ever read on radicalization. The first, I would say, the first disproves the DRIA model. The second confirms the validity of the DRIA model, particularly the importance I attach to ideology in radicalization toward not terrorism, but a particular kind of terrorism, which is vocational terrorism.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we started a bit late, but we have some minutes for one last question. Quickly, please. I'm sorry, and a quick answer, Mr. Alessandro. Yes, go ahead, Mr. What is the microphone? Ici.
Franchement, je n'ai pas voulu poser cette question. Mais puisque je suis de la diaspora tunisienne installée en Europe, entre l'Allemagne et la France, et vous avez présenté beaucoup de choses, ma petite question, est-ce qu'on a le choix pour être terroriste ou non?
Okay, thank you very much.
Non, attendez.
Okay.
Attendez. Pour clarifier cette situation, moi, je suis de la génération de Brigade Rouge, Baden-Meinhof, Action Directe, etc. C'est le mouvement international des étudiants et des jeunes à cette époque-là. Qu'est-ce qu'on a demandé? On a demandé un système, c'est-à-dire international, où il y a la justice pour tout le monde et pour tous les pays. On a dit à cette époque-là, attention, ce système va amener plusieurs guerres et la souffrance pour tout le monde. Et ça va amener à la faillite de plusieurs pays. Et les pays en voie de développement, ils ne vont pas se développer. Ce qu'on vit actuellement, monsieur. Qu'est-ce qu'on a fait pour nous? Ils ont utilisé la force. Et certaines personnes sont allées vers les partis comme le Parti Vert, etc. Mais les autres sont devenus extrémistes. Brigade Rouge, Baader-Meinhof, Action Directe, etc. Et essayez de lire les livres qui ont été écrits quand on était dans le prison. C'est-à-dire notre système monétaire, notre système économique qui pousse les gens. Et j'ai discuté avec les Allemands et tout le monde, c'est-à-dire dans des conférences pareilles, avec les néo-nazis et avec des, qu'on appelle ici, nous, les terroristes, mais là-bas, ils circulent librement. Ils ne sont pas des terroristes. Ils nous disent, ce qu'on a envoyé pour la Syrie sont les combattants de la démocratie. Vous voyez, monsieur, c'est tout est relatif. Et sous quel angle? Et d'ailleurs, j'ai demandé aux néo-nazis, pourquoi? On a discuté plusieurs fois, pourquoi vous êtes néo-nazis?
Ok, thank you.
Vous voyez, j'ai terminé,
madame.
madame. Le problème, c'est-à-dire qu'on pousse les gens. Moi, maintenant, je lutte que mon petit-fils, il ne va pas, c'est-à-dire faire la souffrance que j'ai vécue. C'est-à-dire ce qu'on en train de vivre maintenant. Et je termine, madame, comment 1 200 000 enfants et femmes ont été tués en Irak, mais pas la Cour pénale internationale n'a réagi, aucune personne. C'est un monde où il y a double langage, où il y a des sujets tabous, pas plus.
D'accord, merci. Mr. Alessandro Orsini, try please to have, I know the question is very intricate and
very challenging. But starting by the end, I agree with you about the horrible massacre the West, NATO, the US committed in Iraq. And I think that it is inconceivable that we don't remember every day the massacre of which we are responsible, of which we, in Iraq. And I understand your point. I think that there is enough empirical evidence showing that what the West did in Iraq is simply an horrible massacre. And I could mention that horrible massacre that the American soldiers carried out in Haditha, in the Al-Anbar, in Iraq in 2005. I think that if I began talking about the massacre of which the West is responsible in Muslim countries, it will be a never-ending job. Okay, so I agree with you on this point. And you are right in recalling your attention toward the massacre of which the West is responsible against the Muslim population. But if we come to the DRIA model, which is the object of our conversation, the point I'd like to make to you is that one of the questions I try to answer in my book is, I agree with you that that generation had great ideals, noble ideals. But the question in Anatomy of the Red Brigades is, how is it possible that noble ideals turn into ignoble actions? Because if you listen to Robespierre, Lenin, Stalin, I would say that it is roughly impossible to agree with the idea that they should live in a society with more justice and peace for everyone. But the question is, how is that possible? How is it possible that noble ideals turn to be ignoble actions? So I have an answer in Anatomy of the Red Brigades, but I have no time left to give you the answer. But thank you very much for raising the question.
Thank you very much. Normally we are finished, but just we have one last question from our event organizer team. Yes, go ahead, Miss. Well, quickly.
Thank you very much. My question is about your experience in the your fieldwork experience. So making a direct contact with violent extremists is, I guess, is something that's not easy at all. So how did you manage to make the separation between your stages as a researcher, as an academic researcher, and being a part of these groups And thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is a wonderful question. I love to answer this question, but I have no time left. Anyway, this is a question dealing with my experience as an ethnographer, someone who establishes direct contact with violent people. So given that there is no time remaining, I can only answer by saying that in the first part of my book, Sacrifice, My Life in a Fascist Militia, I worked out a series of strategies to approach and get into violent groups. And Sacrifice is divided into 3 different strategies. The first is the approach strategy. So you need to be very good at knowing what to do to get close to violent groups. So this is the approach strategy. If you are an ethnographer, as I am, who is used to make direct contact with terrorists, with killers, with violent people, you need to be very, very effective. Also, if you want to protect your safety, you need to be very effective in developing a very good approach strategy. Okay, so the second stage in my book is the entry stage. So there is the approach stage. So there are no manuals about how to become an extremist, how to become a militant in a neo-Nazi group. So I had to do that by myself. So the first is the approach stage. The approach stage. The second is the entry stage. So you need a strategy to get into the group. And there is also the third stage, which is the exit strategy. Before getting into a very violent group, you need to know how to go out, how to exit, because you can jeopardize your life and the life of your loved ones. Okay. So, but I would say that this is a different topics. Maybe one day I will have the opportunity and the honor to give a lecture here about how to get into violent groups, how to become a fascist or something like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That would be a great pleasure to have you here again. We are finished. It was a great pleasure. I'll leave the word now to Mr. Mahdi Mabrouk for the final conclusion and words. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا على هذا الحضور الذي رافقنا خلال تقريبا ساعتين. نشكر مرة أخرى كل من حضر معنا، ونشكر أيضا الصديق والزميلة أيضا الذين تولوا تقديم العملين. فقط أود أن أذكر أننا سنكون مع موعد يوم 26 أبريل 2023 مع ألان إيرنبرغ، وهو تقريبا الآن يشغل الساحة الفرنسية بكتاباته العديدة، وهو عن بسيكولوج سوسيال، ومن أهم ما كتب لا ميكانيك دي باسيون، وعودة الأهواء والغرائز، وأيضا لا سوسيتي دو ماليز. فأشكركم شكرا جزيلا، ونتمنى أن نلقاكم مرة أخرى. شكرا جزيلا، ونتمنى لكم كل التوفيق. أيضا باسم من حضروا نود أن نشكر الأستاذ والبروفيسور أورسيني، وأيضا الزميلة عفاف على هذه الترجمة وعلى هذا التقديم. شكرا جزيلا، إلى اللقاء.
Thank you very much.